The other day, Elle and I were out together taking a walk. We like doing that for the exercise and fresh air, but it also gives us the chance to get away from staring at our phones or other electronic screens all day long and actually have a one on one conversation. Even if we walk together in silence, it's really nice. But on this walk, Elle asked me one of her famous big picture questions. She does this all the time. I can almost count on it. I'll be minding my own business, thinking about something really significant, like the difference between thin crust pizza and deep dish Chicago style pizza. They both have their pros and cons, of course, but can you can you objectively say that one is truly better than the other? Anyway, that's the level of deep thought where I'm usually operating. But suddenly, as I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm totally in the pizza zone, Elle will say something like, "How do you think we can achieve world peace?" And I'll say, "How am I supposed to know? I'm just trying to solve the pizza issue over here." The other day, her big picture question was this: what do you want most out of life? And while I wasn't thinking about pizza that day, I needed a little time to shift my brain into a much higher gear to try to answer that one. Although I'm sharp enough to know that the correct immediate response to that particular question is, well, since I have you, dear, what more could I possibly want? I'm no fool most of the time. But she said, that's sweet, but really, aside from that, what do you want most? And she said, I'll tell you what I want most: to stay healthy, to be well, because everything else flows from that. Very wise. All I could do was agree with her. I couldn't top that. And it made me think, not long after that walk, when I read our scripture passage today, how interesting it is that what's on our minds so often shows up in what we read in the Bible. Because right there was a story about Jesus healing a man who did not have health, who had not been well for 38 years. And that was in a time and place where 38 years went beyond the average life expectancy anyway. So this gentleman, it's safe to assume, had been sick for practically all his life. He'd been sick so long, he probably couldn't remember what being well even looked like. And we don't know his specific ailment. He was, among other people, who could not walk, who were paralyzed, who could not see, and who survived by begging. They were together at that pool, and you can picture a large outdoor public bath. It was right by one of the main entrances to the city of Jerusalem, a place to wash your feet after a long day's travel, very high traffic area. So it was a good place to be if you had a debility, and if to survive you depended on the kindness and the charity of strangers. Now, one of the challenges you and I face when we hear a story like this, where Jesus provides healing for someone, is that we can picture him walking around healing people all the time, just moving through crowds with his arms outstretched and curing one ailment after another just with the touch of his hands. But if we examine these healing stories a lot more carefully, in almost every case, Jesus first has a verbal encounter with the person who's sick. They talk. And that's also true here. Jesus sees this man, stops, asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" So the obvious implication is this man has a choice in the matter. You could even imagine he might reply sarcastically, "What do you think, Buster? Of course I want to be made well." But that's not what the man says. He tells Jesus that he doesn't have anyone around to help him get into the water when it's the right time, when the water is being stirred up. So what does that mean? Well, this pool, and over time the name of it morphed into the word Bethesda, this pool was fed by an underground spring, and when the spring overflowed, it would bubble up from beneath, causing a disturbance in the water on the surface. And in those days, there was this legend that this rippling of the waters was caused by the fluttering of angels' wings, so that the first person to enter those bubbling waters when that happened would be cured of whatever ailed them. Now, those are the kind of details and maybe the very first readers of this story would have already known about, but they're lost on a modern reader like you and me. Now, today we still name things Bethesda in honor of that very pool. There are inevitably places of healing and hope, like hospitals. In Central Park in New York, you've probably been to this place, the Bethesda Fountain, adorned with a big, beautiful statue of an angel called the Angel of the Waters, commemorates the opening of the very first aqueduct that brought fresh water all the way from Westchester County into the city back in 1842. Fresh, clean water, healing water, like the waters of Bethesda. But the healing waters are no good unless you can reach them, and this man in the story could not. So he told Jesus that every time the water stirred and bubbled up, someone would just step right over and in front of him first. Thanks. So Jesus had his answer. Why else would this man be right there by the edge of the pool if he did not want to be healed? Philip McClarty is the Presbyterian minister who wrote something interesting about this man. Philip said, when you think about it, 38 years is a long time to wait for a miracle, especially when the conditions were so obviously impossible to meet. From the man's own admission, he had no hope at all of ever reaching the water before the others. So you have to wonder why he kept coming back day after day after day, year after year. Given the circumstances, he had no reasonable chance of ever being made well. So maybe the question Jesus actually asked him was more like, do you really want to be healed? Because if you really do, you're going about it in the wrong way. Unless something gives, it's just not going to happen. But of course, something did give. Jesus tells him to get up and take his mat, and the man was made well. No bubbling water was even required. He just needed to be told that he could walk. Now, there are so many ways to think about what this story means. I have heard some people, some preachers at least, talk about this sick man as if he was some kind of a lazy bum who, after years of coming to the pool, just got used to it. It was his lot in life, being sick. Maybe after 38 years, he was afraid of what his life would be like if he was healed. Change can be a scary thing after all. And until Jesus came along and told him to buck up and walk, he was content just to sit there and accept that being sick was the way things were. Now, I don't like that interpretation. It sounds too much like we're blaming the victim here. At the same time, what Jesus asked the man, do you want to be made well? It sounds a lot to me like the question that Elle was asking me when we were taking that walk. What do you want most out of life? I agreed with her that I also want to be healthy and well, for sure. I don't ever want to take that for granted. We've all had way too many friends and loved ones get sick and even pass away to ever take the gift of life for granted. But my secret sin, if you want to call it that, is that in the daily routine of life, I do sometimes take it for granted. I just assume that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it won't be remarkably different from today or yesterday or the day after tomorrow. Now, special occasions do come up, and I have days that I hope will be more fun or productive or restful than others. I have deadlines to meet and celebrations to plan for and things that I'd like to accomplish. But I also need to be asked, to be reminded now and then, what do I really want most out of life? And the inevitable follow-up to that question, whether it's said out loud or not, is if it's really what I want most and what I need most, then what in the world am I actually doing about that? That question and the question Jesus asked the man by the pool, I think is really the same question. What are you prioritizing? What's most important? Are you stuck? Do you really have to be stuck? Or are you choosing to be stuck? Or are you just resigned to being stuck? What do you need to do to be made well, to be made whole? If there's some conflict in my life, if there's someone in my life that I'm in conflict with, like a family member, for instance, what should I be doing about that to make it whole again? If I'm unhappy about anything, really, can I change that way of being? Can I choose to change, or is it less risky for me to leave things the way they are? Now, we don't always have a choice in the matter about being made well. Let's make that clear. It's no one's fault to have a debilitating illness or injury. But if we do have a choice, what choice are we making? Are we answering that big picture question, or are we avoiding it just one day at a time? Because the big picture of being well, being whole, causes us to take some kind of action that actually leads to change, especially if it's a change internally, a change of mind, a change of heart. I knew a man, a member of a church I served, who'd been estranged from his son for decades. The reason was his son had come out to him. He told his mom and dad at one point that he was gay. The man, the father, just could not handle that news, and he told his son to leave immediately. He wanted nothing to do with him. The father was very religious, and being gay was a choice and a sin, the father firmly believed. Whenever the son attempted to reach out to him, the father just refused. And over time, the distance between them grew to be so great, the man told me, that they simply had no contact with each other. Now, the son had kept in touch with his mom over the years, but the father held his ground until the man's wife became ill and she passed away. And at her funeral, the son showed up. And at the sight of his son, at first the father just didn't know what to do. But then he told me that he had a revelation. The revelation was that he had wasted years, decades, of failing to see what mattered most. The father realized that he had stuck to principles that really weren't principles at all, but small-minded ideas that kept him shackled day after day, year after year. He couldn't admit it to himself, but he was just too afraid of what would happen to his cherished beliefs if he were to accept his son for who he was. The good news is he did accept him, finally, at that funeral. With that revelation of what mattered most, he came to the realization that he could change. He could take up his mat and walk. And because he took that risk, he reclaimed the relationship with his son that he had thrown away and lost. And he told me what that felt like. He said it was as if he'd finally been healed, made whole. You know, there's a Greek word used again and again in different ways in the New Testament, and it's used in this story of the man at the pool of Bethesda. It's translated into English as the phrase, made well, as in Jesus saying, do you want to be made well? The Greek word for that phrase is sozo. It's also translated into English whenever you see the words saved or salvation, sozo. So the big picture question for all of us is, what do we want most? What do we most need? What do we want and need to be? Do we want to need to be made well? Do we want to be whole? Are we willing to discover what salvation really means and what matters most? Well, if so, let's get up and do something about it.